All right, so the respiratory system. Somebody tell me the purpose of the respiratory system. Okay, to breathe is a little vague. Can you be more specific, Sedona? To supply oxygen to all the cells of your body. Well put. And part B is remove carbon dioxide. Okay? A lot of people forget that. I'm very pleased that you can read. That was written for you right on the outline I provided. Remember that this outline is not a replacement for notes, Andrew. And I'd like it if you'd get the other stuff off your desk so you don't have any other distractions, okay? This is simply to give you the key terms and an illustration or the illustrations on the back side, okay? But you should still be adding to this. Some of the stuff I give you information about, others I don't, and you need to add further information in there. Most people know that the respiratory system provides oxygen to the cells, but they forget about this part, which is equally important. I am going to have to move you, aren't I? Okay. You carry all of one pencil for the entire day? What happens if some tragedy happens, like you lose it or break it? Can someone help him out with a pencil? Thank you. Anyway, they forget about the remove carbon dioxide business. Consider this. When you hold your breath or you go swimming underwater, that feeling that you get, that urge that you get to come to the surface, what is causing that? You can feel it build every second. It gets more and more intense until you just have to come to the surface. No.
Oh, the carbon dioxide?
Excellent. The carbon dioxide is building up. And when you come to the surface after holding your breath, what's the first thing you do? Exhale. A lot of people think they inhale. They think they come to the surface and go, you don't. You come to the surface and you go, you breathe out. What you're feeling is the buildup of waste in your blood and in your lungs, okay? When you hold your breath, not only are you not getting fresh oxygen supply, your body's living off of the oxygen that's already in the blood, but you're also building up waste. Your cells are doing the thing they need to do to stay alive. They're taking that oxygen and they're using it and they're making carbon dioxide. So every second you hold your breath, every second you keep this in, the level of carbon dioxide in your blood is going up and up, okay? The same stuff that makes the bubbles in your soda creates that urge to come to the surface and exhale. It's kind of like, you know, your blood needs to pee, if you want to think of it that way. It's building up waste. I mean, when you don't go to the bathroom, you can't just ignore it forever, right? It gets worse and worse and worse until finally you better pee or you're going to wet yourself. Same thing here. You've got to get rid of that carbon dioxide. Some people use little tricks when they're diving. They do this before they go down. Ever seen anyone do that? Okay? It's not to get a lot of extra oxygen. There's only so much you can hold. It's to try to flush out the carbon dioxide so that you can hold your breath longer. Well, that's kind of a dangerous practice because you dive down deep enough and if your brain doesn't get enough oxygen, you pass out. You pass out underwater, now you know what's going to happen. You're going to drown, okay? So carbon dioxide causes that urge to come to the surface. So we know the purpose now of the respiratory system, to bring in the good and get rid of the bad. They're both equally important. But my next question is how? How do we get oxygen, how do we get air into our lungs? How does that happen? How does it go from here into here? Now, this isn't the digestive system. You know to eat, you chew, and then you swallow. We know how do we get the food down. But how do we get air into our lungs? And how do we get it out? Huh? What does that mean? Suck it in and then blow it out. What does that mean? Good. I like the way you put that. You said there's muscle around it, and that's accurate. What most people say, you guys are the first class not to say this, is that, well, the lungs pull in air and they push it out. The lungs themselves are just dumb sacs hanging in your chest. they don't pull in and push anything out. Head up, Matt. So they're just sitting in here. Now I said sacs, a better way of describing them would be kind of like big sponges. But a sponge doesn't squeeze and go back to its original shape on its own. Okay, you've got to do something to it. When you breathe in and you breathe out, what you are doing is you're making more space around your lungs or less space. I'll repeat that so you can wrap your brain around it. When you breathe in and breathe out, you're changing the amount of space around your lungs. Now, I'll talk more about this next class, but if you look at this right here, you'll see on the model exactly how that occurs. This is representing your chest cavity, all of this space here by this plastic container, okay? The balloons are representing your lungs. And this piece right here is representing a muscle we'll talk about later that's directly below your lungs right here. When that muscle is up, do you see how there's less space in this container? And the balloons are deflated. When the muscle goes down, there's more space now available in the container and the balloons inflate. And I never touched them. I never touched them. All I did is change the space around them. Now, this happens because of differences in pressure. And I'll talk more about that because the pressure part's real important. I'll talk more about the pressure part in the next class. But for right now, all I need you to know is that when you breathe in, what you are doing, just like you said, is you're changing the amount of space. You breathe in, your rib cage expands, you make it bigger, and that's why the air goes in. You breathe out, your rib cage gets smaller. And at the same time that's happening, this muscle right below your lungs is also going up and down. Up when you breathe out, down when you breathe in. It's changing the space available here. Okay? All right. So let's look at the structures that we go through along the way. It starts by making space in that area, and then the air is pulled in. We take the space away and we push the air out. When the air is pulled in, it comes in through two spaces, two openings called the oral and nasal cavity. Nasal for nose. You know that. Nasal means nose. Oral means mouth, like Oral-B toothbrush you use in your mouth. But a lot of people don't appreciate what these two cavities, these two spaces, are doing to the air. It's not just a hole. If that were the case, you could just have a hole right here and breathe through it, right here in your throat. And some people do. And yes, you can breathe through a hole cut right into your throat here. But by having a nose and a mouth, you have some advantages. The advantages are is that the air is cleaned and filtered. If you look on your outline, I'm down to the second thing now. It says nasal and oral cavities, condition the air and filter it. The air you breathe is full of all sorts of things. In addition to the dust particles that float around, we also have human skin cells floating around. And we have some things, some mechanisms built into our nose and mouth that filter that stuff out quite well. If you remember when we had the containers of water at your station, how yicky it got by fourth period, remember that? All the little floaties in there. Some of that was human skin cells. Some of it was hair. Some of it was fabric off of your clothes. That water, that moisture, does a good job of capturing it. And also, we know in our nose we have that ooey gooey stuff called mucus. When the mucus combines with the particles, the dust particles, then we get a booger. A booger is born. So all that stuff that you're pulling out of your nose could have gone into your lungs, if you catch my drift. It's like flypaper. It picks it up quite well as the moisture in your mouth and the mucus in your mouth. But it's not just filtering out particles. The little ones are caught by the mucus. The bigger ones hopefully are caught by the hairs in your nose to keep it from getting down there. But it's also going to condition the air. It's going to change some things about the air. The air you exhale is full of moisture, right? You go on a mirror and you see it fog up. That moisture is quite a bit. Every day just breathing out, you lose a lot of water just from exhaling, from breathing out. Well, the air you breathe in is pretty dry here in Tucson. When we breathe it in and we pull it past these moist areas, we add moisture to it. That keeps it from drying out the lungs. Okay, these little sacs, or sponge-like sacs, are going to be very fragile and easily dried out. So that's another purpose. Also, it's going to add heat. It's going to heat up the air. If you've gone skiing, you might have experienced super cold air where it actually hurts your chest to breathe. Anyone experienced that before? Not a lot of people out here in Tucson that feel that on a daily basis. But what you often do then when it's super cold is you do this, right? You put your hands over your mouth. What you're doing is you're trapping air around your mouth and you're warming that air. And then you're breathing the air you warmed. Make sense? Your mouth does that already. You're just helping it out by putting your hands around it. Plus, you're also breathing on your hands, hopefully keeping them warmer too. Okay? So we have to moisten the air, we have to heat it, and we have to filter things out. And usually these things do a pretty good job of keeping stuff from getting into our lungs, unless we're really stupid. Just a quick story. I went on a jog one lovely spring morning, and it was a beautiful day, and I'm cruising along, starting to breathe hard. And along comes, a what? A grasshopper. Couldn't be a bee or a fly. That wouldn't have been a big deal. It was a grasshopper. And he flew all the way into my mouth, because I had it open. That's why you don't leave your mouth open. And was stuck right back there at that point of no return. You know, I had two choices. Throw up, try to make myself throw up by sticking my finger back there to pull him out, or be a man and swallow it. So I swallowed him, because I don't like throwing up. And I could feel his little legs moving all the way down. Okay? So usually it does a pretty good job about filtering things out. All right, now we're going to look at the tubes. Now remember that we've got two tubes here, not just one. One tube carries air, the other one carries food and water. Okay? I have a big tube here in the front and a smaller tube represented by this dark line here in the back. Which one is the one for air? The big or the little? Sorry. Thanks for playing though. The big one is the one for air. The one closest to the front. Your windpipe is what you guys would call that, is the one for air. The one in the back is the one for food. You still with me? These two tubes are very different. This tube in the front is reinforced, and it stays open like a regular hose that you and I would use. The tube in the back looks like it's way too small to swallow food. It isn't. It can stretch tremendously. Think of it more like a fireman's hose that might flatten out, but then when it needs to, it can stretch tremendously. That's your food tube or esophagus. So that one's in the back. The windpipe is in the front. Okay? Yes?
How does like sometimes when you drink water, how does it go to the other one instead?
I'll talk about that in a little bit, Matt. Okay? So if you follow this tube, and you can see where the two kind of come together here, your food tube and your windpipe. That's one of the reasons we choke on stuff. They come together here, but if you follow this tube all the way up, it goes to your nose and to your mouth. Okay? And that's the first thing I want you to know, is that the nasal and oral cavities are connected. I think you knew that. Anytime you've been drinking milk and someone says a funny joke and you squirt milk out your nose, you know they're connected. Okay? On this one day I went to some store, and the lady waiting on me, young girl, she had a nose ring. Okay, no big deal. She had a lip ring. No big deal. But she had this chain attached to her nose ring. And it went up into her nose. And so I asked her, I said, do you mind if I ask you, where's the other end of that chain? And she shows me. It's on her lip. The chain went from her nose up in here, through the back of her throat, and hooked onto her lip. I said, how do you get it in there? Well, I just tip my head back and stick it up my nose and snort it up there and pull it out her mouth. Why, I don't know. Can you imagine having something hanging down back there all day long? Not only that, what happens when you pull it out to clean it? It's going to be covered in mucus and boogers and who knows what. Really attractive. So cool. I want to go do that now. Yeah, and I know some of you can do that with spaghetti. You can do the little, you know, take spaghetti up your nose and pull it out your mouth. You know what they call that? Yeah, it's mental floss. Wait for it. Mental floss. Anyway, this tube here has 3 sections to it, 3 parts. Here's the first part. It's called your pharynx. P-H-A-R-Y-N-X. P-H-A-R-Y-N-X. Pharynx, also known as your throat. When you say I have a sore throat, when the doctor looks in the back of your throat for the redness, they're looking into your mouth, into your oral pharynx. Oral pharynx. When they look into your nose to the very back, they're looking at your nasopharynx. You don't have to know that. I'm just telling you that that's your throat. And sometimes it can get inflamed and red back there. Okay? The next section down here goes from this very important structure we'll get to here in a little bit down to your vocal cords, and that one is called your larynx. Larynx. L-A-R-Y-N-X. Larynx, or voice box. The final section that goes from the larynx all the way down to where we get to your lungs, and we branch off, is your trachea. T-R-A-C-H-E-A. Trachea. So it goes pharynx, larynx, trachea. The trachea is the windpipe. Windpipe's a lot longer than this little piece. We're just looking at the top part. You'll see the rest of it on the next slide. Okay? The way I remember this is I just think of my favorite sandwich. Peanut butter, lettuce, and tomato. Good stuff. A PLT. You've never had a PLT? A BLT? No. Bacon just ruins it. I only like bacon on ice cream. But PLTs, those are good things. Peanut butter, lettuce, and tomato. Okay? Whatever helps you to remember the order. All right. So now we're going to back up to this guy right here. This guy's real important. And I'm skipping around a little bit on your outline, but this guy is kind of like the gatekeeper. He decides which pipe you go down. The windpipe, your trachea, or the food tube, your esophagus. The gatekeeper is called the epiglottis. E-P-I-G-L-O-T-T-I-S. Epiglottis. Epi means on top. Like epidermis is the top layer of skin. Epiglottis means this structure on top of the glottis. The glottis is the hole that goes down to this stuff. Okay? Now this guy, if you think of it almost like a pinball flapper, you know what I'm talking about? You hit the little buttons and those guys kick back and forth. That's kind of how this guy works, right here. And every time you swallow, this part of your neck goes up and this goes down. If you put your hand on your neck right now and you swallow hard, did you feel something go up and down? Yes. Okay. That's your epiglottis back behind there doing its thing. This goes up and this goes down. And that little flapper then closes off because you're swallowing. Get it? You're swallowing spit is all you really swallowed right then. And you're taking that spit and you're pushing it down to this tube in the back, your food tube. So this little flapper closes off like this. Right now you're breathing so it stays open and air flows in. And if you swallow with air, you can force some air down into your stomach and give yourself a nice burp later on. Get it? But this guy must close whenever you are swallowing. Everyone thinks I'm so good at catching people chewing gum. First of all, it's not hard at all. They're the person doing this. Okay? That's my first clue. But I particularly like it when I say spit out the gum and they go, I don't have any gum. Do I look retarded to you? What did they just do? Swallow. Okay? All you got to do is look at their throat. And that's what I do routinely. I say, spit out the gum, and I look at your throat. Yeah. Now you're going to be doing that. Going to cover it up. And and you can see that their epiglottis is doing its thing. They're swallowing it. Okay? And then they lie to me afterwards. Wouldn't have been a big deal if they just spit it out, but now it bugs me because they're lying to me. All right? So the epiglottis is the gatekeeper, if you will, the doorman. He's going to decide which door. Now I got a door over here and a door over here. This is for air. This is for food and water. Now you're at lunch and you're laughing and joking with your friends, telling stories, eating pizza, drinking soda. And you're going back and forth. Oh, pizza, here, soda, there, laugh, here, air, here. Okay? And you're having to constantly be doing this. Close and open, close and open. If you do that switching too fast, your doorman can't keep up. And a little bit of Coke makes its way down into your trachea. And now you're going to have a cough. Okay? A cough is where this muscle here on the bottom does this. Does a quick little ooh, like that. Okay? And it pushes out air with pretty good intensity. When you do a full-blown cough, you can shoot out that little bit of Coke or spit or whatever it happens to be at over 100 miles an hour. Okay? If I throw a baseball 100 miles an hour, it's going to go pretty far. Imagine how far a little bit of spit can go. That's awesome. That's how you infect people with your diseases. You cough and you don't cover your mouth. Or, if you're polite, you cough and cover your mouth and then you shake their hand and spread it that way. Okay? That's why, people that are smart, they do this. They cough on their shoulder or someplace that they don't touch with their hands. Or you have a little handkerchief or something, your little disease rag you carry with you everywhere. All right. Well, that's what I call it, disease rag. All right, so that's the epiglottis. Very important deciding which way things go. Another little tidbit for you that you might not have known is that it isn't possible for you to breathe and swallow at the same time. Every time you swallow, this is closed momentarily. And when it is closed, you cannot breathe. There's no way for air to get past it. Case in point, you're exercising. You just ran the mile and you want to have a drink of water. You go up to the drinking fountain and you drink a little bit and then you have to stop and go, right? You can't drink and breathe at the same time. You can go back and forth real quick. You can hold water in your mouth and breathe through your nose, but you can't do them both at the same time. So when you see the ventriloquists and they take water and they pour it into their mouth and then they're supposed to be talking, it's not possible to do that. You can't be swallowing the water. It could be coming out the corners of your mouth, but you can't be swallowing the water and speaking at the same time. Yes? Can't babies breathe and swallow at the same time? Not that I know of. But what happens is that babies, you know how you have to constantly burp a baby? Yes? One of the problems is this mechanism isn't working as well, and we get a lot of air into their stomach, which causes, digestive problems. And so they feel that gas building up and they have to burp. And so they have difficulty with that part of it. Yes?
Why doesn't air always go down there?
Air does always go down there, but when you're swallowing, it's closed temporarily. Get it? Sedona, you have a question? No? All right. Now we're moving on to this part here. We're at the bottom of the larynx. The larynx is what you guys call your voice box, right about here, where you feel the most vibrations, near where we have our carotid arteries, right? And you'll see that this tube right here, if you look at it from the end, it has folds of tissue that can open and close, just like you see over here. That's an actual photograph. When you look down someone's throat with a camera when they're singing, and I'll show you later what that looks like, those little flaps, they're moving all over the place. They're vibrating. You guys call them your vocal cords. The real term for it is vocal folds. There's two sets. There's the true and the false vocal folds. The true ones are the lighter color you see there towards the center. The false vocal folds are the outer layers. And both of them can open and close. When you speak, when you sing, you are shaping the sound to some degree with the true vocal folds. But to really make clear, distinct sounds like in speech, you're going to use your tongue and your mouth. You make certain shapes with your mouth and tongue to make certain words. The true vocal folds do some of that. The mouth does the fine-tuning and makes it very distinct. So it is possible to speak and have air going the other way. As long as air is going past those vocal folds, they'll vibrate. Okay? A guy's vocal folds are going to be longer and thicker. That's why they have a deeper voice. Right now, your voice is changing because testosterone, guys, is going to those vocal folds, and they're getting thicker, but your brain hasn't quite gotten used to it yet. So every now and again, your voice cracks. That's the reason why. But once they stop changing, then your brain will figure out how to use them properly. And as long as air is going past them, you can make sound. A longer vocal fold makes a deeper sound, just like a longer pipe on a pipe organ makes it a lower tone. So you can make sound. You can't even make speech with it going the other way. Try talking as you breathe in. Okay? It does work. Hello, my name is Mr. Barnes. I can do it, but not very effectively. Your voice sounds very hollow and empty. And that's because you're trying to shape the sound before it goes to them. We want to shape the sound after, in this direction, okay? Occasionally someone might get cancer of the larynx. They may have to remove those folds. And so they can no longer speak without the assistance of a device. You probably have seen a character like this on South Park.
Oh yeah.
You know, he holds a little thing. It's called an artificial larynx to his throat, to his voice box right here. And he says, hello, how are you? And his voice is a constant tone like that. And you probably noticed too, if you've ever seen anyone use that in real life, that they really exaggerate the way they move their mouth because the sound is actually coming from that device. What they're doing is they're shaping it using the muscles in their mouth. Okay, as air flows by, they're shaping that. But the sound, the vibrations are actually coming from the device. This would normally do it. Now it has to come from the device. Okay? So that's another reason not to smoke. Head up, Matt. Because you might have to have your larynx removed. All right. The last part, the trachea. The trachea also helps filter out some stuff. A lot of people aren't familiar with this, but you are with at least a part of this. When you get particles that make their way past the mucus and the moisture in your nose and throat, and it doesn't become a booger, then it will make its way down your trachea. In your trachea, there are also little finger-like projections, very tiny, little microscopic finger-like projections on the wall of the trachea. And what they'll do is, if particles make their way down here, they'll stick to the side, and then the little projections called cilia, and this is on your outline, right in the middle under trachea, the little cilia will do this brushing motion. And they'll push that stuff up. It's going to be mixed in with the mucus. They'll push it up about this much, about 3 centimeters, 1 to 3 centimeters every hour. They'll push it up until it gets to right about here. At that point, you have formed a... What? Loogie. Yeah, and then you hawk a loogie and spit it out, right? Or, if you're a real man, you recycle and you swallow. Okay? Sedona. Yes, you have similar things that work very much the same way, except they absorb instead of pushing. Okay? Good point. All right. So now we're down into the trachea. Now before I go on to the next slide, I want to show you a couple other things. Get to you in just a sec. The reason this pipe, your windpipe, is able to stay open, if you feel along it, you might feel the bumpiness of it. There are little rings that reinforce it. Those rings are made of cartilage. And that's what keeps that pipe open. If it wasn't for the rings, it would flatten out. Now, your esophagus does flatten out. And it can stretch tremendously. I read somewhere that if it wasn't for the bones in your neck that get in the way, your esophagus could stretch enough that you could swallow a bowling ball. Of course, you wouldn't be able to get it into your mouth, but you could swallow it. Okay, you had a question back there?
Where's the sinus thing like?
Sinuses are the name for the space up in here.
Because like my doctor said I have like a sinus infection.
Okay?
So like there's like these little two holes and like you're not the lady, they close up and all the mucus closes up back there.
Really?
That's all it comes out.
Thanks for sharing.
That's kind of cool. I'm not familiar with that. You know, there are doctors that just specialize in this. They're called ENTs. Ear, nose, and throat doctors. Yes?
What happens if you break one of those rings? Will you die?
I don't know. I can tell you that what they do is they cut between them. If, let's say, this gets blocked off and you're suffocating, I'll get out my pocket knife and I'll cut a hole right in your throat. Okay? And I'll take some tube or the case of a pin, take the middle out of the pin, and I'll jab it in there so you can breathe through that little hole to keep you from dying. And they do that. That is an emergency, not with a pin, but that is an emergency procedure to save someone's life. Sedona? If you do it incorrectly, you could damage them. You got to do it in the right spot. Not just anyone should pull out a pocket knife and carve it into someone's neck. Yes?
So they just use a knife, they just take a knife and shove it in.
I'm saying if we're out in the middle of nowhere, okay, I would do that. But no, otherwise, I'm going to try to find some other way to get that chicken bone out. You guys do know the Heimlich maneuver, right?
Yeah.
You get behind the person, and you get right around here, and you pull hard into yourself. You're pushing this in, which pushes the air out, and hopefully that chicken bone goes flying. If you find yourself with no one around, and you think you're choking on something, and you can't get any air, if you ask the person if they're choking and they say yes, they're not. Because if they're truly choking, not that they don't need help, but if they're truly choking, they can't say anything, and they'll just be like, hands at their throat. But you can use a chair, and you could thrust yourself on top of that chair. It might look stupid, but if it saves your life, who cares? Okay, I want to share something else with you. We talked about the vocal folds and how they vibrate. But the false vocal folds, they're also important. They can close off and block the air from getting out, just like the epiglottis can do it. And there are 3 occasions that I can think of where people use their false vocal folds. Use their false vocal folds. Yours too. No, yours are crooked. Sorry. You get an F. You get an A. Can you think of any occasions where people might close off right in here to keep the air from getting out? Well, that's interesting. Trying to keep themselves from cussing. Yeah, maybe, I suppose. Okay. Possibly. Here are the 3 I'm thinking of. Help me out with these. Number 1. Right? Don't have any legs. So I try to lift up something heavy. And what happens is you close those vocal folds, the false ones, and that keeps the air trapped in this area. Okay? Now, when you try to use your abdominal muscles, they have something firm to push against. Get it? You don't want this to be all mushy here in your belly. You want to have something firm to push against. Second occasion. Actually, the second and third one have something in common. Both of those are occasions where we bear down. Have you heard that expression before?
Yeah.
Wildcats.
Yeah. Besides the wildcats bearing down. Yeah. Bearing down is a specific thing that you do using abdominal muscles. You might do it, ladies, you might do it 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 times in your life. What am I talking about? Not pregnancy, but giving birth. You have to bear down to push. The third example, all of you hopefully do this at least once every 1 to 2 days. Yeah, poo, you got it. When you bear down to go to the bathroom, you're closing those vocal folds. Bianca,
What?
you got a question?
Oh yeah, isn't it when you smoke too? Because when you smoke if you inhale it and hold it in. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to leave that one alone.
How do you know?
Yeah, now, think about it. Okay, so now we continued on. This part you're looking at here is just a continuation of the other slide. You understand that? And now instead of looking from the side, we're going to look from the front. So here you see the larynx and the trachea. The trachea continues here, and there you see the larynx, the voice box. I'll just tell you a quick story. Back when I was like 19, I was a camp counselor at YMCA, and I had a bunch of third grade kids, and I was reading them this book, and one of the kids was sitting on my lap, and he didn't seem too interested in the book. He just not even looking at it, just kept looking at me. And I was like, he's not interested in the story. And he just kept staring and staring at me. Of course, I'm 19, I got zits all over my face, so I figured he's just staring at my zits or something. And then he gets this look on his face. He's like, ugh, ugh. And he starts to point at me. He goes, ugh, what's that? And I thought, well, maybe I got, a bat in the cave or something, a booger, or who knows. Gross! What is that? He says. What was he pointing at?
Your eye.
My Adam's apple. My Adam's apple was weird to him. This thing sticking out on my neck, he thought it was some sort of weird growth. But girls, you do have this cartilage as well. It's called the thyroid cartilage. It's just not as obvious on you. It tends to grow bigger on guys, and then when you're thinner, it's even more obvious, and it really sticks out. That's represented by this light blue stuff here, thyroid cartilage. Okay? That's your Adam's apple. And that's the thing you felt go up and down when you were swallowing hard. Behind that is where the epiglottis is, right in that area. Okay? And right in the same area is where your voice box is, where your true and false vocal cords are. On this picture too, you can see the rings I was talking about. So Nathan, you would cut, I think somewhere like right in here. Don't quote me on that, but something like that. Okay? If you had to cut into their windpipe. The trachea continues on down. So we just saw a little bit on that other slide. And then it branches off and goes to the two lungs. Which lung is this? Right lung. You'll notice that the right and the left lung are different. They're different in shape. Oops, sorry, wrong one there. They're different in shape, and they're different in the number of pieces that they have. The right lung has 3 pieces, and you can see it here. Here's the first. Here's the second. And the third piece is this little piece here. So we say it has 3 lobes. Whereas the left lung has 2 lobes, 2 separate pieces. Okay? Yes? How does your lung collapse? It has to do with compromising, having a problem with the amount of space around the lung. So this is a sealed compartment around this lung, and this is a sealed compartment. Okay, except for the mouth. And if I break into that compartment, then all of this stuff no longer works. Okay, if I were to poke a hole through this, this is no longer going to work. And your lung would not be moving. It would be collapsed. And sometimes you get a bullet wound comes through and makes a hole in that space and could cause the lung to collapse. All right, so tell me, why are the right and left lungs different shapes? Why is the left lung smaller than the right lung? Nathan? Because it has to fit your heart. Your heart goes right here in this space. That little cutout is called the cardiac notch. Cardiac notch. And that makes your left lung smaller. You can see the little cutout right here to accommodate the heart. Cardiac notch. The lungs, because they're constantly doing this, getting bigger and smaller, they have a covering that goes over the outside. It's not periosteum. It's not pericardium. In fact, it doesn't even have peri in it. Don't ask me why. It just doesn't. But they're called the pleural membrane. Pleural membrane. P-L-U-R-A-L. Membrane. People sometimes have problems with that membrane. They may have pleurisy. Have you ever heard of that? Pleurisy? At least one of you has. The pleural membranes, they're going to hold those lungs in place, and they're also going to have kind of a lubricant between the membrane and the lung. That way, as the lung is getting bigger and smaller, it's not going to be rubbing up against the ribs. If you had just ribs directly on the lung tissue, it would wear itself raw. You'd have a worn spot. But the pleural membrane protects it as it's changing sizes. Get it? So that's what that thing's for. So it's not really shown here, but it would be the covering over the outside of the lungs. All right, so let's follow the rest of the path of the air coming down the trachea, and then it will branch off. And they often describe this as a tree because it looks like one, an upside down tree. Here's my tree trunk. This would be the ground. Okay, there's my person there standing. Woohoo! Okay, upside down. And here is one branch, and here's the other main branch on that tree. Breaking off of that, we're going to have smaller and smaller branches that go out to all the individual parts of the lung. Are you starting to see an upside down tree? Kind of, sort of. Okay. Except for the part hanging down there, I know. All right, so this is the bronchial tree. And this first piece that branches off is called the bronchi. B-R-O-N-C-H-I. Bronchi. You'll see that in anatomy, they do a lot of the same kinds of things with naming, and you kind of pick up on a pattern. With the cardiovascular system, we had the major artery, okay, the aorta. That would be like this, the aorta. And then we have smaller arteries, just called arteries. And then we have the smallest arteries called arterioles. So here we have bronchi, and then the smaller tubes are called artery arterioles, bronchi, bronchioles, bronchioles, B-R-O-N-C-H-I-O-L-E-S. Those are the smaller tubes. If you have asthma, sometimes these smallest tubes, and you can see what one looks like over here, will spasm, will squeeze and get too small, and the air won't go in and out properly, and the person feels like they can't breathe. They take their inhaler and take a hit on it, and it opens those tubes right back up, and they can breathe normally again. Relax, Andrew. It's just an expression. Bronchioles, okay, are the smaller tubes. Now, if you look at the end of those tiniest tubes, then you'll see these little grape-like sacs. These little sacs are the all-important part of breathing. These are the things that make the lungs like these big sponges, because of these little sacs. If this were the eye, that would be the retina. If this were the ear, that would be the... What actually does the hearing? Cochlea. Good. That's a star. Come get it.
Oh, yes.
Okay, that would be the cochlea.
That's his third one.
This is the part, good, he needs 3 for the extra credit. This is the part that actually gets rid of the bad stuff and takes in the good stuff, okay? And I want to show you a close-up of that, but first let's get the name. This is called the alveoli. A lot more syllables than you think. Alveoli. Alveoli. These little grape-like sacs are where we actually take in the good and get rid of the bad. If you zoom into one of the sacs, it's going to look like this. Here's one of those sacs, just one little grape, okay? It's surrounded by capillaries. Remember our capillaries? This is the part we showed before that was in the lung, the capillaries. This little sac is right next to it. And when you breathe in fresh air, the oxygen goes inside the sac, and it wants to go to where there's less of it. Head up, please. The oxygen goes into the capillaries, okay? Into the capillaries. And the carbon dioxide that's building up in there comes out of the capillary and goes into this little sac, and you breathe it out. So put it another way, the good and bad switch spots right here. They go right through the wall of this sac into the capillary and vice versa. So you breathe out the extra carbon dioxide and you take in more oxygen. That's what the alveoli looks like inside. In order to get the air into the lungs, we have to make the space bigger. Going back to this, and I'll talk more about this tomorrow. We have to make the space bigger inside. We do that several ways. We make our chest bigger. When you breathe in, you have muscles, your pectoralis minor muscles. Remember the pectoralis major? Pectoralis minor that helps us enlarge our chest. We have muscles between our ribs. Can't really see them very well here, but you can see how the ribs have been cut, the little white things here, and there's muscle between all of those. Those are called your intercostal muscles. And that makes your rib cage smaller or bigger, depending on the amount of space between, okay? The final thing is this muscle, a very important muscle in breathing. If you play a wind instrument, if you are a singer, you should have learned about this muscle called the diaphragm. D-I-A-P-H-R-A-G-M. The diaphragm causes a lot of different things, but normally it's on autopilot. It does its own little rhythm, up and down. When you cough, your diaphragm goes up forcefully. Okay? When you have a hiccup, it has a little spasm that it does every so often. It's doing its normal breathing, and then every so often it has a little spasm, a little hiccup. Get it? That's what causes your hiccup and why you can't control it. Because you don't have direct control over the diaphragm like that. But you might have felt pain in your diaphragm before. Whenever you work a muscle, whether it's your bicep, the muscles between your ribs, or your diaphragm, you build up an acid in it. Bianca? You build up an acid in it. That acid is called lactic acid. And it builds up more and more to the point that you can't even use the muscle any longer. It just gives up. Okay? That acid, by the way, and I'm under breathing right now if you're following along, that acid is what causes the soreness the next day as well. So if you've been running a lot and you start to feel that stitch, that pain in your side, sometimes your coach will tell you, well, it's because you drank too much water. Baloney. Drinking too much water isn't going to cause that pain in the side. In fact, it might be better for it the next day. What it is that you have fatigued your breathing muscles. Perhaps it's the muscles in between your ribs. You've used them a lot. Or it's the diaphragm, which is right exactly at that same point. Okay? That's why you get that stitch in your side. It's from breathing hard. Nathan.
Like our coaches on football say that we have to breathe really hard when we're doing like all our exercises and stuff, because the lack of that can build up and
That's somewhat true. Yeah. When you breathe in and you breathe out, you help your body recycle that stuff to some degree. There's only so much that your body can get rid of in a certain amount of time. There are lots of tricks to breathing too. To help my diaphragm work, I think about using my belly. If you put your hand on your belly, when you breathe in, what does it do? For some of you, it does nothing. But if you're breathing properly, it should go out like a balloon. And when you breathe out, it should go in. Okay? It's like you're filling your belly up with air, which you really aren't. But what you're doing is you're making this move out so that that can go down. You're making space. And that's a way to improve your breathing. And a lot of people, if you just think about taking these deep breaths and using your belly when you breathe, you might avoid getting that stitch in the side. Okay? I did give you some other terms there for breathing in and breathing out that I'd like you to know. When you inhale, that's also called inspiration. I was so inspired by the beautiful sunset. My diaphragm went down, okay? Because I made more space. I inhaled. When you exhale, your diaphragm goes up, and that's called expiring. Just like the expiration date. It's dead. And you breathe out your last breath, that's it. That's all she wrote. Okay? So there's exhaling or expiring and inhaling or inspiring. The last one are just some random things that we covered. I want to make sure you understand each of those. Swallowing is caused by what structure? What determines which way things go? Epiglottis. Hiccuping and coughing are caused by what structure? Diaphragm, pushing up forcefully. Exercise and the effect of smoking. Those are two facts I want you to write down that aren't on the outline. Two sets of numbers that I actually do want you to know. First, you should exercise at least 3 to 4 times a week for 30 minutes at a time at your target heart rate. I'll repeat that. You should exercise at least 3 to 4 days a week, 30 minutes a time at your target heart rate. I showed you how to find your target heart rate. That means that for 30 minutes of that exercise period, you want to keep your heart rate in that range. It's going to take a little while to get it up there, okay? So that might take you 10 minutes to get it up into that range. And then you've got to maintain it for 30 minutes. And then, of course, you got to cool down, and there's rest in there, and drinking water, and stretching, and all the other good stuff you should be doing. So overall, you're probably exercising for an hour. But of that hour, 30 minutes of it is going to be at your target heart rate. I wonder how many of you get your heart beating that fast, okay? Probably about as fast as it was for the step test, for 30 minutes a day, 3 days a week. How many think they do that? Okay. The rest of you are sitting home playing video games, and you're going to slowly get fatter and fatter, and your heart's going to get less and less fit. Okay, other thing I want you to write is just below it there, and as you're getting that down, let me just comment on that in general. I always think that if aliens were to come to our planet, they were to visit us, they would think that we are the most unevolved, unintelligent group of organisms they've ever encountered. Because we do some pretty stupid things as human beings. So they might observe a human being growing plants, and they'll think, that looks pretty smart. They're growing plants. They're cultivating them, and they're adding fertilizer. And then they take that plant, they chop it down, and they dry it, and they add a bunch of chemicals that are known to be poisons and toxic to the body. They then take that plant that they've treated, and they roll it up into paper, light it on fire, and start sucking on it. Okay? And they know that we have all these things built into our body to protect us from damaging our lungs. We've got the mucus in our nose, the moisture, we've got the cilia in our trachea, all these things to keep our lungs pretty and pink. And instead, we light a plant on fire and suck on it. So long, for so many years, so many times, that our lungs start to turn tar black, and we can't breathe any longer. And we have to carry an oxygen tank around because we can't get air in normally. That's how stupid smoking is. Okay? It's bad enough that you're sucking on a burning plant, but when you add things like rat poison to it, which is what has been added, and nicotine that make it addictive, you end up with a lifetime habit. 15 to 20 years less of a life. If you smoke a pack a day, every day, for life, turn around that, you can expect to live 15 to 20 years less. If you think it's cool and you look tougher or whatever, you fit in more because you've got a burning plant in your hand and you're sucking on it. I mean, just think of it. It's just stupid. But once people get the habit, particularly the nicotine, and they're addicted to it, they'll do anything for their fix, just like any other drug addict. Okay? They may have to have their larynx removed and speak through one of those little things. I'll just give you a personal example. Speaking of my grandfather, I remember the last few hours with him. We went to visit him in the hospital. Lifetime smoker, damaged his lungs severely, was breathing on an oxygen mask. And what did he want to do with his last few hours? Have a cigarette. He'd rather go out and smoke a cigarette than to spend some last quality time with his kids and his grandkids. That's pretty sad. You realize just how addictive that is. You see someone that has had a hole cut in their throat so they can breathe because of cancer. And what do? They take the cigarette and they suck on it through that hole in their neck. That's how addictive this thing is. If you never start, you never have to worry about kicking the habit. And you get to live 15 to 20 years longer and have healthier lungs to enjoy all the other fun activities you can do instead of sticking a lit plant on fire in your mouth. You know, it's just foolish, I think, some of the times. The assignment I just gave you, the crossword puzzle, will be due in 2 classes, but it might not be a bad idea to review what we just covered tonight.